So, we are going to be starting a new teaching series this week. We're going to be looking at what I've entitled The Good News. And we're going to be looking at basically Colossians chapter 1. And not the whole book, but just the first chapter. And today I'm going to be introducing this to us. And there's reasons why I believe it's important for us to really focus on this right now. Now, over the last few weeks, we've really entered into a time of what I would like to call self-discovery, where journeying with the Spirit, we've been learning more about ourselves, about each other, about God, and how we can relate to each other, relate to our community around us. And especially the last series, we talked about this idea of love requires, that Jesus has commanded all of us people of faith that claim to follow him, he's required us and asked us to love. And to love like he's loved. And one of the ways that happens is by understanding and sharing the good news. Now, we often in church call the good news the gospel, and for those of us that didn't grow up in a faith tradition, when you hear the word gospel, I know that maybe a lot of different things pop into your mind, but the thing that should pop into our mind that Paul was directly referencing in Colossians is that there's this incredible good news. And there's some implications of this good news. And so we're going to be talking about this over the next few weeks. Now, for those of you that are maybe new to the faith or not in faith right now or coming from a different tradition, Colossians is a letter that was written to the city of Colossae. Now, the interesting thing that I like about this letter that Paul wrote to them is that he's writing to a people that he's never met. He's never been there. He had a friend of his maybe a colleague, Epaphras, who had actually went there and shared the good news with this city. And out of that, Paul is writing to this group of people that he's never really met. And Colossians is a very short letter. It's only 4 chapters long. It's a very short book. But yet in there it contains some really significant ideas and theology and philosophy that I really believe that we as people of faith really need to sit back and look at and discuss and meditate on and try to work out the implications for us in our current culture and in our current society. And so one of the things that I'm going to say right off the beginning is that there's going to be some things along the way that I'm going to say that may be hard to hear, and that's okay. And there's going to be some things that maybe is going to be hard to believe, and I want to say that's okay. It's okay to struggle with these things. And I hope in the middle of our struggle, we come to a place where we can adopt this stance of faith, and we can adopt this stance of believing what is true. So one of the things that I would like to say before we dive in is that, the New Testament as a whole, the way I view it as a pastor, beginning with the oldest book in the New Testament, which is James, and then you look at the letters that Paul wrote that are out there in Hebrews and all the books, and then you look at the Gospels, I really believe that one of the interesting ways to look at this is that when Jesus came, Jesus taught. It's important for us to realize that, yes, he died an unjust death, which we are completely and totally aware right now of all the injustice happening around us. Jesus was a victim of that. He was murdered unjustly. And then God raised him from the dead, and he is now ruling and reigning in heaven. And I believe that with all my heart. Again, that's a hard thing to believe, but yet I do believe that. And when Jesus was here, a lot of times we tend to narrowly focus on the tail end of his life versus the totality of his life. And the reason why Jesus was here is he was teaching us, he was showing us, He was demonstrating for us God, what God is like, because He is God. And He was also demonstrating for us how we should live in response to that. And so the New Testament authors had taken His teaching, and the reason why I think it's an interesting way to view the New Testament as books of philosophy is because they're taking the truths of Jesus. They're taking the teachings of Jesus and they're working out what the implications of that is within that context. What are these truths? What do they mean when we start practically applying them to our daily lives? How we engage with each other, how we live in community together. It's really important for us to understand that. And the reason why is because we should be doing the same thing today. We should be taking these deep truths and be thinking through, how does this apply now? How do we take all these truths about Jesus and what the New Testament authors were saying, and how do we work that out within our context? And so that's one of the things that I love about the book of Colossians is really Paul wrote the book because he was debating against a set of ideas that were being put forward in Colossae, that you had to have some special wisdom or special knowledge, and it was called Gnosticism. And he's writing really against that philosophy, debating it with what I would call Jesus philosophy. And so it's really important for us to really look at it that way, because I think it really gets to the heart of what Paul and the other authors of the New Testament were trying to do, is work out Jesus and His teachings. And so we're going to look now at Colossians chapter 1. Today is going to be the introduction of what's going to take place over the next weeks, but it's really important that we understand what's going to happen today to lay a foundation for the next few weeks. So wherever you are right now, whatever device you have or a copy of Scripture, I'm just going to ask you to open that. We're going to go to Colossians chapter 1, and we're going to begin reading in verse 3. So Paul is writing, he begins in verse 3, he says this: "In our prayers for you, we always thank God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. For we have heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and of the love you have for all the saints." Again, we're praying for you because of that, and then praying for you because of the hope laid up for you in heaven. You have heard of this hope before the word of truth. Get that, before in the word of truth, the gospel, which is good news, that has come to you, just as it is bearing fruit and growing in the whole world. So it has been bearing fruit amongst yourselves from the day you heard it and truly comprehended the grace of God. I love that. Good news, grace of God. This you learn from Epaphras, our beloved fellow servant. He is a faithful minister of Christ on your behalf. He has made known to us your love in the Spirit, and for this reason, since the day we heard it, we have not ceased praying for you and asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of God's will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you may lead lives worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to Him, as you bear fruit in every good work and as you grow in the knowledge of God. May you be strong with all strength that comes from His glorious power, that you may be prepared to endure everything with patience, while joyfully giving thanks to the Father, who has enabled you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the light. He has rescued us from the power of darkness, and He's transferred us into the kingdom of His beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. So I want to spend a few minutes this morning in this passage here, in this beginning opening statements that Paul is making to the Colossians, because there's a lot of deep truth here that we need to lay as a foundation. Therefore, out of that foundation, we can then begin to discern, as Paul is praying here, how we should act, how we should live. What is the wisdom and knowledge that pours forth from this? So there's some key things here that I would like for us to touch on. Now, before I dive into this, I think it's really important for all of us to understand that we live in a time where people are trying to understand themselves, their identity, who they are, what that means to the people around them, what that means to the community around them, and we are constantly trying to figure this out. Now, what's key, my friends, is this, is that we have to realize that something is going to inform those decisions. We're going to use something to inform what that is so that we can base our identity, we can base our activity around those ideas. Now, you can get it from a lot of different places. Most places we're going to get that from our social cultural aspect. And I just want to challenge you that not always is that a good place to do it from. And actually, personally, for me, I have chosen to use Scripture. I have chosen to use Jesus primarily as the foundation for what shapes me as an individual, what shapes my outlook, what shapes my ideas, what shapes my view on culture and society, and how I can be like Jesus in the midst of all of that. And so I'm just going to tip my hand in the beginning and say that I am definitely showing preference here. I am definitely biased towards Jesus and towards the Scriptures as being that key informative piece in discerning who I am and how I bring that to bear within my culture. And I think, again, bias that should inform our church. That should inform our community on how best to be. So I'm just letting you know right off the bat, I'm biased. So anyway, let's move into a few things here that I think is critically important. In verse 5, it says this, because of the hope laid up for you in heaven. Now, what I would like to say about this is that word hope, we use it a lot, and actually it's a lot of times it's just become a very benign word. It doesn't mean a whole lot. And the reason why I hope for this, I hope for that, I'm hoping that someday in the future, somehow, some way, we use the word, if I can say it this way, quite trivially. And I think what's important here is that when Paul is talking about hope, he's talking about a very specific hope. So hope here that Paul is using is not this disjointed, disembodied hope that doesn't have a focus. It's a hope that is very focused. And what is it focused on? It's focused on the person of Jesus. It's focused upon His teachings, and it's focused upon His promises. So that if we submit to that, and if we use that to form us, and if we decide to follow Jesus, and we're following Him, we have an object of hope. So when Paul's talking about this, he's bringing people into a very narrow focus. He's talking about this specific focus of Jesus and the hope that it brings. Very important, because a lot of times when you listen to people talk about hope, it does seem often like just a disembodied and hope it gets better kind of idea, where within Jesus we get this very narrow focus, if I can say this, on what love looks like, and what generosity looks like, and what community looks like, what God looks like, what He taught, and how we can exist, and all of those great things. And it would take the rest of my life to derive all out the truths of all of that hope. But yet we have this beautiful hope in Jesus that not only is for right now, but it is also for us in eternity. And then he goes on to say this, you have heard of this hope before in the word of truth. Now, truth here is not the truth like we tend to work it today, where you have your truth and you have your truth, I have my truth, and we can all have truths and they can all disagree, but however they're truths. Paul is not saying that here. He's saying that this is truth. Now, the reason why he's saying that is because Jesus, who Paul is talking about, said that I am the way, the truth. Jesus is the truth. So when he's talking about truth here, he's talking about the person of Jesus and what Jesus has said, how Jesus had lived, what Jesus had taught. So he's saying here, you've heard of this before in the word of truth, the gospel. Now, the gospel, I find sometimes we can confuse this sometimes, and we can narrow it sometimes. And so I just want to tell you really quickly that the gospel here means good news. And we kind of, in a way, fell victim to, in the 20th century and part of the 21st century, the early part, we kind of fell into this reductionist view of what the gospel is. So basically, if you were to go up and ask someone, hey, what is the gospel? They would tell you that Jesus was God, He died, He was raised, and now He's in heaven, and if you believe that, you can go to heaven too. And I'm not disagreeing with any of that. However, that's the Cliff Notes. That's the reductionist view of the gospel. And that's why I felt like it was really important for us, especially in a world of chaos, especially with so much division, especially with so many diverse ideas competing and all the noise coming at us. I really felt like we need to look at the gospel, but we need to look at it not in this fact of we've reduced it down to just a few things, but look at it from a larger capacity. Because when we do that, not only does this right here, the things that I said I already agree with, not only is that good news, but I guess in the South we could call it, when you look at it bigger, it gets gooder or better. So anyway, I just want to say that I'm going to take this whole view of the gospel. And this is what Paul does in chapter 1. He takes this bigger view of the gospel, and then he begins to derive implications of what that means through chapters 2, 3, and 4. So anyway, the gospel, it is a big story, and it is great news. It is the best news. And so we are going to unpack that. And then in verse 6 it says this. It says that the gospel has come to you. Now, I find it interesting here. It says it's come to you. It's never left. So the gospel is there. And when we tease out the next few words, this is really important. So the gospel has come to you. It is still there, and it is bearing fruit and growing. Now, interestingly enough, some translations will use the word that it has come to you, it's bearing fruit, and it's going out into all the world. Now, what I would like to say to you, that idea of going out is not a bad idea, and it's not a bad word, but the word growing is a better word, and here's the reason why. Tied to the rest of what this chapter is talking about, especially parts that I've already read. The gospel has come, and yes, the gospel is spread out, and we're going to talk about this in just a second, but the gospel is spreading out. It is spread out, but the word growing not only implies the spreading out, but it also implies the growing deeper. And this is really important because Paul is saying here, what is one of the things he's praying for? He's praying that this truth of the gospel and the ideas that Paul is bringing as an outworking of the gospel, as an outworking of what Jesus taught, he's praying what? That this would sit in you and produce what? More wisdom about God, more wisdom about Jesus, more wisdom about you, and more wisdom about how you are to live in accordance with that. So I'm praying what? That you would gain in all of this knowledge and wisdom. Why? Because the gospel's come to you, and it's not just, 5 miles wide and an inch deep. It's worldwide, but it's growing very, very, very deep. And so that word growing is really important for us. As a matter of fact, for those of us that grew up in a church culture, we actually call that discipleship. And that's really important for us to understand. It was never supposed to be surface. It's supposed to be very deep. So growing is the better word. Now, it says it's growing in the whole world. Now, interestingly enough, this word world is actually cosmos. And I find this very interesting. So that word would mean, obviously, the world. It encompasses all the people living in the world. and it encompasses the entirety of the universe. And so what I would like to say, first of all, about the good news is, yes, it is very individualistic for me. It has direct implications for me. And we're going to talk about in the next weeks, which is incredible. But it has this very vast and broader story and very vast and broader implications, not just for the individual me, but the collective we and the collective universe. I really believe that this is part of the gospel. So then Paul goes on, I've already alluded to this, he begins praying for increased wisdom and knowledge. He talks about Epaphras who brought in this gospel, and he's really, and I think at some point in time, maybe I will take us through the prayers of Paul, because I think it would be quite shocking about what he prays for and what he doesn't pray for. And so at some point in time we'll do that, but I would just encourage you this week, maybe spend some time looking at what he's actually praying for in this passage. So I want to come down to verse 11, and then I'm going to share a few more thoughts in this brief introduction. So in verse 11 it says, what? That I'm praying for you, that you're made strong with all strength that comes from His glorious power, that you may be prepared to what? Endure everything with patience, which is key. Why? Because we're living in a time right now that you cannot escape the constant bombardment of negativity and the, if I can say it this way, the anti-Jesus message and the anti-Jesus life and the anti-Jesus way of living. We're being constantly bombarded with that. So he says, what? I'm praying that you will be able to what? Endure this with patience and with joy. Now look at verse 12. Giving thanks to the Father who has enabled you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the light. Verse 13. He has rescued you or us from the power of darkness. Now, this I want to pause on really here, because I really believe it's important. This word power here, I think we could maybe change that word a little bit to what some of the older translations use, because I think it creates a little bit better image, if I can say that, of what's taking place. And that word is domain. That He has taken us out of the domain of darkness. And then the next line it says He's transferred us into the kingdom of His Son in whom He loves. Now, this is really important, because kingdom that we see applied to Jesus, the kingdom of light, and domain are two different words. So when you're reading a translation where it talks about the kingdom of darkness or the kingdom of Jesus, those two kingdom words are different words that create different pictures. Now, we have seen these two pictures played out before us, oh man, for a long time. From the beginning when, like time when Shakespeare was writing his plays, all the way to King Arthur and all the way into even movies today. We see this constantly played out. And here's how it plays out. That there is this domain of darkness, and it's not really a kingdom, it's more oppression. And it's dark, and it's evil, and it's vile, and the rulers are just tyrannical people, and it's not so much a kingdom as it is a tyranny, and it's horrible, and it's awful, because the people there exist for them. And we actually see this played out beautifully in North America right now, where leaders don't exist for the people exist for them. And that, I'm not going to get going down that rabbit hole. But anyway, we see this tyrannical, dark, oppressive ugliness. And we've seen it played out over TV, literature, for eons, right? We've seen this. And yet, in the middle of that, there is this other kingdom that in the end prevails. And it may not look like it's going to prevail throughout the movie, but in the end it prevails. And what is that kingdom? It's a kingdom of light. And if you noticed, even in the storytelling, like one place is dark with dark castles, and the other place is light with light castles and light colors and hope and all of these things. And it's this story that's being played out before us, that this good kingdom where the rulers care about the people and they exist to empower the people and to make things better, to create a better community for people to live in, that this kingdom eventually overcomes this kingdom of darkness and frees the oppressed in this domain that is horribly oppressive and ugly. And what it says here is, when you take that imagery, it says that God, through Jesus, took us out of this domain of darkness, oppression, and evil. And one of the things here that is really hard for us to understand is that there is evil in this world. There is evil that exists in a disembodied format. There is the presence of evil in this world. And there's evil that indwells the heart of every person. And what happens? Jesus comes into this scenario, and God, through Jesus, takes us out of that domain, and then He brings us into this different kingdom. And when that happens, it begins to expand, and eventually this hope that we heard about at the beginning of the chapter, this hope that we have is eventually this kingdom will spread and overpower, overtake, and destroy the darkness, the oppression, and the evil. So this is a beautiful picture here. Again, good news. This broader picture of the gospel is that we've been transferred out of this gross junk into this beautiful place with Jesus. Now, here's the interesting thing. When a person decides to follow Jesus, when a person decides to make Him their focus of hope, and they begin letting Him retool and reinstruct and reshape who we are, and we begin to obey Him, because, believe it or not, and this is something I'm going to talk about later on in the weeks, is that if you're going to follow Jesus, there's a belief, but belief is not enough. It has to be an outpouring of action. That belief has to be practiced. And so as we're doing this, one of the things you're going to notice is that we're still here. You know, some people have thought this idea of, well, you know, I'm saved, or I'm following Jesus, and you know what, I'm just here until it gets so bad that one day I'm going to just get rescued, and then God's going to nuke the place, and then He's going to create something better. And I don't want to debate all that. I'll just say I don't agree with a lot of that. But what I do believe is this, is that when we do enter this kingdom, we're still present here on earth. I didn't get transferred to some beautiful beach, and that's where I would want to be, is on a beach, sitting in the sun, where it's actually summertime, which I don't know if Calgary knows what that is right now, but it's actually summertime, and it's sunny and warm, and that would be my heaven. But anyway, I didn't get transferred there, right? So what does this mean, that I've been transferred from one to the other? And my friends, what we have to realize is that this is talking about an eternal, internal working. So what that means is while all this chaos is happening all around us, and while we're seeing the incredible inaptitude and destructiveness of our leaders and the decisions that they're making that are having implications on us, and that's nothing new, because if you study what was taking place within the first century in this empire called Rome, it wasn't a really good thing. And so we can see that even in that culture and in that context, they were still struggling with this. So what does this mean? It means, if I can use this vernacular, I'm unplugged from that and plugged into something different. I don't have to live in fear, oppression, evil. I don't have to live where I'm dominated by all of that garbage. I can live completely different. You know, within our culture, we're using words like wokeness, or I'm woke, or whatever you want to call it. And somehow I believe, for people trying to work it out, that maybe haven't really grappled with Jesus or trying to work out this idea or this concept of how do we unplug from all of the garbage and plug into something different. And the interesting thing is when you start listening to the language, it's all about hope and love and serving and blessing and treating people equal and all of those things. My brothers and my sisters, people, my friends who are watching this is all of those themes that over here we wish was true, but over here is true. That we can plug into something different. That while we're still being pressured by really junk stuff over here, it doesn't determine me anymore. Because I'm not under that rule. So I'm not going to be the person who only cares about myself. I'm not going to be the person that only cares about my family. I'm not going to be the person that only cares about mine and mine. I'm going to engage my community in love and hope and peace and joy. I'm going to operate in this good news. See, we didn't have that capacity over here. But now we do through Jesus. And so I would like to encourage us that this is really good news. That yes, there's stuff that is completely out of our control. And as an 8, that drives me insane. Because I often think if everybody would just listen to me, the problems would be solved. But anyway, that drives me nuts. But yet, in the middle of all the things I can't control, there are things through the power of Jesus I can control. And I actually preached a sermon on this, series on this a few months ago. You can go back and listen to that. And so I just want to encourage us that we're now not under the evil rule here of evil and all this garbage. We are now under this kingdom rule where Jesus actually cares about people. And He's loving us. He's empowering us. And He's showing us a different way to operate, a different way to live that is not only beneficial for me, it's beneficial for the collective we. And this story is going out all over the cosmos. It's going out this way and it's growing deeper this way. And we have to continue to have conversations around this good news. What does it continue to mean? So my brothers and my sisters, my friends, this is really important for us to understand. 2 different words: dominion of darkness, kingdom of Jesus. We've been delivered, transferred out of one into the other. And one day, this kingdom is going to expand so big and so vast that this kingdom will cease to exist. This domain will cease to be. And I have to tell you, I'm excited for that to happen. I wish it would happen today. So in closing, it says this. It says He's transferred us. And then it says this, His beloved Son, in whom we have redemption and forgiveness of sins. Now this word redemption is a powerful word, twofold. Number one, using this in a Greco-Roman context, this would be if I went down into the slave markets that existed then. Slavery is not a new concept. It's not a concept that derived on the North American continent. This thing has been going on since eons. It's evil. It's wrong. And right now, there's more human slaves right now on the planet than there's ever been before. So the gospel is important. The good news is important. But in the middle of this, Jesus, it says, has redeemed us. He's walked into this slave market. And what has He done? He's bought us and then freed us. We hear this beautiful story time and time again where we see in our history where people have actually modeled Jesus and done this. They've went into these dark, oppressive, ugly places and bought slaves and then turned around and freed them. That is what Jesus did for us. He's redeemed us. He's bought us out of the slave market, and He's freed us. The next thing here is a very beautiful picture, one that we don't really grapple with enough. Is it says this. It says He's redeemed us, but then He's also forgiven us of our sins. Now, what does that mean? When you look at the word for this, what it means is that when you take a person, so let's figuratively, I'm just going to do this. Tony, come on up here. Everybody give Tony a hand where you're at. Tony had no idea I was going to do this to him, and I'm glad that he didn't. So Tony's a 2. He's a helper, so you're helping me. All right. So I'm going to play the role of Jesus. All right? And you're just the person I just redeemed, okay? All right. So when it says forgiveness of sin, there is something attached to Tony. It's attached to me. And it's sin. Now, when we think of sin, we think about lying, cheating, stealing, adultery, those kind of things. But sin is an overarching, huge, dark, ugly thing, right? And so, for those of you that have ever watched the Doctor Strange Marvel movie, which I like Doctor Strange, he's kind of cool. You haven't watched it, which I don't even know what to think about you right now. But anyway, there's this point in the movie where Doctor Strange is questioning everything, right? And his teacher comes up to him, and she literally just kind of pops him in the chest. And then we see that his body's left here, but then, like, his soul, if I can say it this way, detaches out of the back. And so it's like he's looking down on himself, like what just happened here. And that's a beautiful picture of what this means. It means that I have received forgiveness of sin. So he has actually taken sin and detached it, taken it away from me. So no longer am I defined by this. I'm defined by something different. No longer am I this. I'm something different. So the great news about, thank you, appreciate it. So the great news about the gospel, the good news is not only is all of these incredible things taking place, but this junk that's attached to me, sin, he has actually removed it from me. It's no longer me, part of me, or any of that stuff. Now, yes, do I still fall down? Do I still make mistakes? Absolutely. But there's not sin dividing me and God anymore. He's taken it all away. Read the rest of the Gospels. Read the rest of the New Testament. It talks about this, right? So it's detached from me. I'm no longer defined by this. I'm no longer defined by this dark, depressed. I'm no longer a slave to bondage and fear. Romans 8. I'm now over here in a kingdom. And now I am a citizen of that. Detached from that. So this is the beautiful, beautiful introduction to the good news. This is just the introduction to the good news. And over the next weeks, we're going to be unpacking even more of it. Not the totality, because again, I could do that till I'm retired. But we're going to unpack more the scope of the gospel and what that means. So here's what I would like to leave with you. If you're in a place where you are enduring, I think we all are, to some shape or form, all of this garbage that we see taking place. I just want to submit to you for you to think about, you're no longer here. It doesn't have to be the defining, oppressive controller of your life. You can address that garbage actually being a citizen here. So I want to remind you, those of you that have chosen to follow Jesus, you are in a great place. That yes, all the stuff is still happening around us, but that doesn't have to determine who we are and rob us of our peace and our joy, our mercy, our kindness, our grace and compassion. Because those ugly things are not our rulers anymore. And for those of you that haven't decided to follow Jesus yet, I'm going to encourage you, maybe find a Jesus follower in your life that you can have that conversation with, to ask them about the implications. How do you do that? But I would encourage you that, in my mind, it's just simply saying yes to Jesus. I want you to be the focus of my hope, and I'm going to follow you and your teachings. I'm going to be a Jesus follower. I want to encourage you that you don't have to be here in this slave market anymore, this dark, oppressive ugliness. That Jesus has already made a way to bring you out of that. All you have to do is follow it. Big story. Really great news. And I hope that you will join us over the next few weeks as I really begin to open up the broadness of what the good news actually means. So as the worship team